Hi, my name is Adam Shoemaker, and I'm rector at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in downtown Charleston, back for another edition of Rector's Corner. And I'm very happy to have with me today Alan Yarborough, who has visited our parish in the past. Alan is the Church Relations Officer for the Episcopal Church of Government Relations. Thanks so much, Alan, for making the time to be with us today. I wonder if you could just begin by saying a little bit about what our Office of Government Relations does. How long has it been in existence, and what does your role entail?
Sure, absolutely. It's good to be with you, Adam, and good to be back in the way with the church community there. It was nice to visit. Gosh, that was 3 years ago now, maybe longer.
That's right.
Yeah, wonderful to be with you all again. And so the Office of Government Relations, it was started in the late 1970s. Actually, it was the first sort of version of it created by General Convention. And the main roles of our office, there's sort of two of them. The first is to represent the Episcopal Church's values, the Episcopal Church's policy positions to the U.S. federal government. And so we're a part of the church-wide staff, but we're based in Washington, D.C., and our staff, are meeting on a daily basis with members of Congress and their staff, with government agencies, with the presidential administration, to engage in conversations, both in the sense of holding government accountable, holding our elected officials accountable, but also in bringing in the resources and experiences of Episcopalians and Anglicans really globally into the policy and legislative conversations. The sort of second role, which is really where my particular position comes in, is to equip the church in this work. So to help individual Episcopalians to build relationships with their elected officials, to speak out on issues that are important to them, and to see how we can influence those issues through policy and legislation. So as the church relations officer, I'm doing trainings in advocacy, civil discourse, on political conversations, as well as covering a couple of policy portfolios. But my main role is to equip the church in that work.
Well, and the country is so polarized and so divided. I would imagine that civil discourse and trying to work across lines of difference must be an important part of what you do.
It is, and I think the original inspiration, part of the inspiration for this work that we sort of restarted in 2017, 2018, was to share what I think is a gift that we get as staff, in this office, where we have to engage across political difference as a part of our work, both with elected officials from different political parties, but also with Episcopalians who write us, with different perspectives and disagree. I find that to actually be an encouraging space. And so in taking lessons and experiences from those conversations and applying them in our civil discourse curriculum, we're hoping to sort of expand that space and share that gift with the church. But it's a part of a longer, history of the church's involvement in civil discourse and political conversation and political advocacy that goes back, decades before just this curriculum.
I'm curious, as a denominational agency, how are you received by elected officials on Capitol Hill?
I mean, overall, it's fairly positive. It's different coming in from more from a values perspective, more from which is typically informed by our faith and thoughtful deliberation. Our church policies come from General Convention and Executive Council. They don't come from our office. So there's this process that goes into creating our positions, and then in our work representing them, we're not necessarily just saying vote yes, vote no on a bill. We're saying it is important to pay attention to particular populations, the underrepresented, those who are marginalized, and really getting into the details, of how we can accompany and lift up and work with those populations.
I wonder if you could say a little bit about sort of what you see as the pressing issues that you're really focused on right now.
It varies, and it varies in part by where sort of the energy and interest of the country is and the interest of Congress is. But I think we always toy with this, given our limited bandwidth. It's a relatively small staff, about 6-7 people, not all full-time. We have to allocate our time, effectively, to actually make a difference. And sometimes that involves sort of going along with what's in the media, going along with where the attention is, even if that may not be some of the areas where the church can be most effective. But there are a lot of things that go on in legislation and advocacy that just don't make the news, and in particular, anti-poverty work. So looking at the budget and appropriations process that we're in the midst of now, this has been in the news more, I think more from a partisan, political conversation and point of interest, but really the work is about how can the government help alleviate poverty domestically in particular has been, the recent conversation, but internationally as well. And that's something that we're involved in conversations with regularly, even if that's not in the news.
And voting rights legislation, right? That's something you're focusing on as well?
It is, and that's actually one of the policy portfolios that I cover, voting rights and Haiti. So it's been pretty busy the past few months on both of those topics. In terms of voting rights, we've been looking at the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would restore pieces of the original Voting Rights Act that were struck down by the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court left sort of a roadmap or word folks are using as a window. I think it's more sort of an indication of how to restore this. That's what that bill would do. And then we were looking at what was originally the For the People Act, and was then revised and renamed the Freedom to Vote Act. That's what failed in the Senate a couple of days ago. We've been advocating for those bills, wanting to see them move forward, but recognizing the sort of reality that they're unlikely to and really have not. And so mixed into the voting rights piece, that sort of voting space, is our civic engagement work and our Get Out the Vote work and efforts as well. And so we're continuing that and already starting some new programs around the 2022 midterms, just to increase voter participation as a means of addressing and hoping to overcome, new barriers to voting that are in place.
I want you to say a little bit about how churches like ours can be supportive and get involved. But before we get there, could you just say from your perspective why you feel it's important that people of faith engage in political issues?
There are a number of ways to approach that question. The first, and sort of maybe one that we dismiss too easily, is that I think there's a scriptural call for us to speak out to power and to speak out to our government. But beyond that, I think there's a misunderstanding on what political means. It does not have to mean, it's not limited to partisan engagement, but it's actually about the process of making decisions together. And so by engaging in that process, we're actually engaging in carrying out our faith more effectively by being in the world, by being a participating entity in the policy and legislative process. And when it comes to the federal government in particular, the federal government has certain authorities that other entities, don't have. And so if we want to engage in refugee resettlement or foreign policy or some environmental protections, we have to engage with the federal government to impact that. There's also a concern of scale. The federal government and the scale of impact it can have is just enormous. It's far greater than what we can do in our own tangible ministries. Not to say that that work isn't important, it is, and it can in fact inform, what we say regarding policies and what we're looking for. But for those reasons, it's critical to speak out. I often say for folks who are skeptical of getting into it, I ask what outreach ministries they're comfortable with. What outreach ministries are you engaged in? And almost all Episcopalians are pretty quick to mention something: a homeless ministry, volunteering at a soup kitchen, there's a community garden, any number of things. And I encourage them to reflect on the goals of those ministries. And then to add, once they have that reflection, to add how can they pursue those same goals through policy advocacy, not as a replacement, but as something that's complementary to the ongoing, direct ministry work that the church is doing.
No, thank you. I feel very passionately about our call to be political, not partisan, but political, and I do think there's a key difference there. Can you say a little bit about how Episcopalians like those at St. Stephen's and beyond can get involved and be supportive in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're working on sort of levels of engagement, how for folks that want to do a little bit to those who want to get really involved. And sort of our bread and butter engagement has been our action alerts that we do through the Episcopal Public Policy Network. So that's our means of engaging the church at large. We have an email list that we send out a call to action about once a week, and social media as well, where people can engage and write their members of Congress directly in a timely manner that's informed by our office's strategic work in DC. So that's sort of the basic thing, but also a very important part of our work and way that Episcopalians can engage. Beyond that, though, we have a number of sort of static resources on our site. There are trainings for advocacy, training documents for advocacy people can go through. Our civil discourse is accessible for individuals to work through on their own online. And then we have two relatively new programs for those who want to go sort of above and beyond. The first is our EPPN Ambassador Program, which is kind of looking at developing brand ambassadors for our work to help amplify the advocacy calls that we're making within their own diocese, and to help hopefully make that more relational, to frame it in a way that may make more sense and be more inviting to the people in their local area. So EPPN ambassadors, and then the second is our Episcopal Election Activator Program. And that's something new. We just launched it officially, I guess, 3 weeks ago. The idea being to similar to the EPPN Ambassador Program, but focused on get out the vote efforts exclusively. So we're going to try this through the 2022 midterms, see how it goes, see how well we can equip people and what the response is, and hopefully it'll become sort of a permanent piece of our office.
And so if people want to sign up for these things, the quickest way is to go to your website?
Yes, yep, it's quick and easy to sign up for our emails on our website. And then there are a whole bunch of advocacy tools, the ones that I mentioned that are kind of general advocacy resources, but we also have a lot of educational resources on the issues that we advocate on as well, to help people dive into the thinking and being informed about the issues that we advocate on.
And what is the website?
It's episcopalchurch.org/OGR.
Okay, terrific. And the last question, Alan, is a question I found myself asking many of the people I've interviewed over the course of the pandemic. I just wonder if you could reflect on how this pandemic has impacted your work, good, bad, or otherwise.
I miss the in-person interactions in DC with staffers and with members of Congress, and I think Congress in particular has pivoted pretty well in remaining accessible via Zoom, if not maybe improving their accessibility. So our ability to have meetings and have them more frequently has been positive. In terms of doing church trainings as well, that not having the expense of time and money for traveling to places means I've been doing more advocacy trainings. It's sort of been opened up to parishes. But really that informal piece in DC is missed. Going to think tank events, running into somebody in a hallway, holding a door open for them and, striking up a conversation by saying thank you. People, we emphasize the relationship aspect of advocacy and the importance of not just, coming at it from a position of saying vote yes, vote no, but asking how we can be helpful. And interacting with people as if they're human. They're legislators, they're people that work in the government, but they're people as well. And this a really random story I enjoy sharing to emphasize that. I went to a congressional office several years ago before the pandemic. As a representative in Virginia, and they had, like many offices do, they'll have agricultural products or samples of something that's produced in their district there in the office for people to take. And this office had little packets of peanuts, or Virginia peanuts, and it was the same brand I remember growing up that Bed Bath & Beyond sold. And my mom would always pick up a container of these peanuts anytime we went, and I enjoyed eating them. And so I saw them and like reacted. And the staff, these offices are pretty small, so there were probably 3 or 4 staffers around, and they, turned and they were like, "Oh, you like these peanuts?" And I shared that story about growing up with them, and they just loved it. And it opened up, not a policy conversation, but an opportunity to be relational in this work. And it really made it a warmer experience. So that type of thing I miss. And I think it's something that advocates miss as well. I mean, individual Episcopalians can build those relationships in the same way, but COVID is sort of preventing that. But the accessibility is there, if not improved.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. And for those listening in, please do look up the Episcopal Office of Government Relations on Capitol Hill, learn about its work, and I encourage you to get involved as you're able. I'll be back with another edition of Rector's Corner soon. In the meantime, friends, stay safe and well. Take care.
Thank you.